Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we have an exclusive with none other than Malcolm Lerider. He is the Senior R&D Manager for NEO, and this is a very privileged opportunity for us to really understand and explore exactly what's been going on with NEO of late. And I'd also like to acknowledge two people in particular who have really brought to the fore some of these key concerns. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge Chico Crypto, Tyler Swope. He has tirelessly always broached key concerns of NEO, and very recently he's done that very directly. And also Jeremy from Blue Collar Crypt. He's also started to talk quite a lot about some of the issues and concerns that the NEO community have, and that's exactly why we're here today. So without further ado, Malcolm, thank you very much for being on the channel for this update and for this serious conversation today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that you're taking the time to gather all these questions from the community and give me the opportunity to explain everything to everyone. So there are a lot of questions that have been also answered in different channels, and I tend to feel that there hasn't been, well, the AMA was one channel where the community had opportunity to ask or gather a lot of questions and ask it, but it was also sort of one-way communication, since there wasn't any room for a feedback loop.
Sure,
so and I appreciate that we have this talk here and make sure that everybody's up to date on what's actually going on in both our ecosystem and also in general about their concerns.
Absolutely, and we sincerely thank you for allowing us the opportunity as the NEO community and those who really are proponents of the technology, or perhaps are questioning it right now, more to that point. We really respect that you have decided to come on and show your face and answer these questions directly. Now, let's get down into the first question. I wanted to ask you specifically with regard to the AMA that was recently done. You mentioned that that was the case with both Erik and Dar. Now, obviously, communication itself has been an issue, Malcolm. So can you tell us why exactly are people in the community saying that the communication has been a concern of late, let's say in the last 6 months, with regard to the way in which NEO has been communicating?
So I have my own perspective on that, coming from a Western mindset and how I am used to working in, for example, in Sweden, where I come from. So the NEO started out last year. Well, it didn't start. I joined NEO last year, so my understanding of the NEO team starts from around August last year, and back then it was a rather small team. So when I joined the NEO team, we were about 20 members. So a rather small team, and back then I was the only, well, Westerner within the team. And when we had a team of that size, it was a rather fast-moving, or I would say a very fast-moving team, because we were sitting basically in a two-floor small office. So the marketing and community team was sitting downstairs and the technical team upstairs. Right. And all the communication that were done were basically overheard by the other team. So that triggered for a very good feedback loop. So when there was anything discussed that any of the other team members had any inputs on, then the feedback was brought up quite early. And it was very easy to get to decisions in that kind of environment. And but then the team started to grow, of course. So when we reached around 35 members, which we also moved to a new office space to be able to fit all of these team members, there was a reorganization in NEO Global Development. And I'm not sure if you recall that or not, but it was around the time where we had the second large meetup / summit in Amsterdam. So it was around that time. And what happened then was that we realized that the team was too large to be able to successfly have full meetings where everybody can discuss everything. It's not feasible anymore because the size of the team had grown into. So we structure the team more strictly into different departments.
I see. Now, I apologize for interrupting, but obviously we have a lot of questions to get through, Malcolm. But I do want to ask you this. Obviously, you restructured and you had, because of the growth of NEO at that time, but surely you can appreciate the importance and the imperative of communication for the community, and thus, ensuring that continues, that flow continues to...
Yes, so that's what I'm coming to. So Chinese culture in general is a very hierarchical culture in terms of company environment. So when you have a hierarchical structure with the dedicated managers, what you get is that the managers, they decide everything. So from my perspective, I have felt that during the last 6 months, we have had a situation where every decision has to go through the dedicated manager, and they have to decide. And then all the questions and all the things that has to be decided sort of piles up at that single person within every single department. It becomes, I don't like to call it the bottleneck, because bottleneck in my perspective kind of feels like people aren't doing what they're supposed to do, and that's not really the case. It's just too much to do for each single department head. So I have felt that decisions have been very slow, and communication is naturally part of that as well, because information is not forwarded in a sufficient manner.
Yeah, the paradox that I see, though, is that we see Hongfei, or Da, as many people know him as, being an international speaker, an international exemplar for charismatic leadership of a blockchain. Now, in that context, surely he would understand the international imperatives as well as just the cultural frame for China. Why wasn't that factored into the communication approach?
So you have to consider. I mean, Da Hongfei is of course a very busy man, and part of the reorganization was also that too much was handled over into Da Hongfei and Erik. So they was part of, we previously had what was called a NEO Council, which was basically Erik, Da Hongfei, and Tony Tao. And that was also part of what was then felt as the bottleneck, and why we wanted to organize into a hierarchical structure. So the intention with having Da Hongfei and Erik also taking a little bit step back was to allow for delegation of work tasks into the different department heads, which obviously has shown now in retrospect to have its own kind of issues, which are the ones that we are addressing right now.
I see.
So I see that a big part of it.
Sure, and can we talk about that specifically? You insinuated that there's been a change even in Hongfei's position and taking a step back. Can we discuss that specifically? Obviously, that came up in the AMA recently. What exactly is Da Hongfei's role right now with regard to NEO and also Erik? And is there a change in the way he's being restructured in any way at all, shape or form, in terms of leadership, or playing more of a team role, perhaps, or a manager role, as I've read?
Right. So that was, you can basically see that the last 6 months was a time where Da Hongfei and not Erik. Erik has always been a very, very strong part of the NEO team. So he has always been 100% in NEO. And Da Hongfei did a step back to be able to focus more on the things that he should focus on. So he on the vision and mission, or more or less, and to not be too concerned about the daily operations. So that's why the intention was from him to take a step back. And
so what exactly is Da's role now, Malcolm?
Right now he has been involved more into the, well, not daily operations, but more into the team itself, the NEO team. So we have gotten the feedback, of course, that the community would like to see Da have more presence within the NEO community, and he have received that feedback as well. So he is now also more involved in well, I wouldn't say the daily operations, but in the main vision, and more concrete in delegating and clarifying the vision and mission to the managers and the team within the NEO. And he also wants to be more active within the communities. That's also part, and he have addressed this as well personally.
I see. Like to... So, sorry to interrupt again, but in that context, is it fair to say that Da Hongfei is still leading NEO?
Yes, he is. Da Hongfei and Erik are still leading NEO, and they're leading NEO in terms of mission and vision. And the daily operations is handled, of course, by Johnson, which is our general manager.
Yes. Okay. Now I want to move across now to the G3 Alliance discussion. Now, recently, I actually saw a graphic of many different parties on stage Hongfei were included, whereby there was a promotion of the G3 alliance. Since then, it's been alleged from the NEO team that in fact there is no formal G3 alliance. Can you please explain this?
From my perspective, I have understood it as not any alliance at all. So the three persons that were marketed as part of the G3 alliance do have a personal relationship, and they do share some part of the vision of having, well, smart economy is NEO's vision, of course, and other parties have complementary vision that work very well together. And the name G3, the only place where I have read the G3 was one of the Elastos members who sent it on Twitter. So there is no from.
If I can respectfully take you back, though, there was actually a meetup held, a specific one known as the G3 Summit, and in that respect, we had these representatives, these founders and CEOs, all on stage collectively. So my question is, why? Why was that the case, and why was there a screen behind them that said the G3? What is?
I don't have that information. I'm not. I wasn't that involved in that part of the
sure. Well,
the marketing of that, so I can't answer that. I don't have that.
Sure, I appreciate that. You know, you've been honest about your inability to answer that. Now, if we could talk about the team itself, Malcolm, that is again a concern with regard to the growth of the team and the lack of transparency potentially of who these new members are, and what your plan is to disclose more information about them.
Yeah, so this was also brought up by the community during the last few weeks, and it's also something that has that we've realized to bring more information to the community. For example, there have been suggestions on the team page to have, for example, links to LinkedIn and perhaps a brief description of all the team members. And this is something that we are working on right now to implement as well. So the LinkedIn link is very easy to add. That's something that we will add in the short term. And it's not really a problem, but the thing is that the majority of Chinese people don't have a LinkedIn. It's not really used in LinkedIn by other Chinese persons than actually are working at international companies.
I see. And Malcolm,
it's not known in China.
Sure, and given that you are not originally from China, I appreciate that you come from a different cultural background. Now, in that context, are you bringing in your awareness of the West into the NEO ecosystem so you can educate the imperatives that need to be had when we're discussing these things, like including LinkedIn's, including information about teams?
I am, and now we have more international team members on the team right now as well. So Tamar Salan, she joined us in November last year, and she's also doing an excellent job. She's part of the business development team. We have Miriam, who joined us just a few weeks back, and she has been working a lot on the legal compliance hub. She's also doing a great job in educating the team here on the Western's perception, because that's something that I have felt from the time I joined the NEO team, that the expectations among the Western community and the Chinese community is seriously very different, and that's what I have been pushing to at least present to the people in charge of how things will be perceived by the Western community, and whether or not that advice is followed. That's of course another subject.
I see. Now, just referencing the dichotomy almost between the Chinese audience and the Western audience with regard to NEO, and also participants, perhaps is a better word. Now, do you see a difference in the kind of approach that each of these parties take as community participants with regard to the popularity itself of NEO? My understanding is that there is a difference, and particularly in the beginning, there was a lot of interest in the West or in the non-Chinese space originally with NEO. Is that your experience as well?
So my experience is that in the West there has been a lot of interest in terms of the trading community, I believe, has been quite large in West, and in China it has been mainly the developer community that has been very interested. So it's quite interesting to see that in China, well, first of all, you're not even able to trade tokens in China.
Mm-hmm.
So to have an interest in NEO from a trading perspective doesn't make much sense for Chinese if you don't find a way to be able to trade anyway. Regardless, but the development community in China is very it's very mature, especially in terms of NEO itself. So we could see, for example, in the first NEO competitions, which ended in March, where the main participants were actually from China. So I believe that, I don't have the exact numbers in my head now, but I believe China was at least 30 to 50% more projects than the second one, which was the United States.
Right.
And we see the same now in the game development competition that NEL is holding. So they are, of course, also targeting the Chinese market because it's a Chinese development community, but anyone is of course able to participate in it. And where we also have a lot of new Chinese games coming out.
So clearly gamification is a focus for the NEO ecosystem of the future as a use case, but I want to draw it back into the key questions of the community for a moment. Now, with Da, for example, let's reassess his role, because he's heavily involved in what is to be NEO 3.0, and we'll talk about that further. Also the NEO Foundation, and even the NGD and NEO Global Capital, NGC. So my question is, how can Da be so occupied in so many different roles and still really function as a leader of NEO itself?
So he's not actively involved in all of these on daily operations perspective, and that's also what we discussed earlier about him taking. I think it has been perceived as a step back, but it's not really a step back. It's more about delegating the daily operations and the daily tasks to other persons, and he's still very, very involved in terms of leadership, even if that may not been seen fully from the community side. So, for example, NGC is managed by the partners in NGC, and 3.0 is mainly driven by Erik, and operations in NGD is managed by Johnson. So I wouldn't say that he is fully occupied with everything. He is setting the vision and mission for all of them, but he's not involved in the daily operations of each single part.
Well, thank you for that. Now I want to move across to discuss recent activity on NEO, or lack of activity, in fact, with regard to the network being down. That affected a multitude of different DApps or projects known as Apex, Switch.io, Traveler, Zeepin, and the list goes on. That relates also to a forking incident that happened recently. Can you talk us through exactly what happened and why it happened?
So there was a bug that has been identified around 6 weeks ago. I have to check the timeline, around 6 weeks ago. And it has been discussed publicly on GitHub as well. So you can go back and see the history there. And there has been a solution proposed, there has been a solution tested, and we were just planning to deploy it when this issue happened. So it's a little bit like more slow that, well, 2 days before the actual deployment, the incident happened.
Right.
And we have to also clarify here, because I understand that there is a misunderstanding of fork, and people state, well, NEO can't fork, and yes, NEO can't fork. So when this bug happened, what we ended up with was actually 2 blocks of the same height. And when that happens, the blockchain just stops. So no new blocks are being created. So you will never end up with a branch where one of them are selected.
But
so
sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify something, and this is important we discuss this now. I've read that the incident was accidental by nature from the outset. This is confusing because you're saying it's a bug, and therefore bugs are not ever accidental by design. They happen. When I heard accidental, I assumed that was by one of the nodes, one of the actors. So is it specifically the bug that caused this, or is it because there were 2 nodes, who literally actualized the transaction at the same time and caused this?
No, it was a bug. It was a bug, and you can see the GitHub issue itself and read what the issue actually was.
Okay.
So it was not an active decision by any of the nodes. It was part of the code where it created a branch or not branch, it created two blocks of the same height by a bug itself, and that cannot happen now with the new patch applied on the NEO blockchain.
Right. So are you, just to clarify, so are you saying that for the very few node controllers that you have, for example, you have Fembushi, can you name a few so that people can know who they are? Who are some examples of people who could potentially align and simultaneously do this theoretically? Obviously didn't, but who are some of these names with regard to Fembushi, COZ, Neo Global Capital? Who are some of these node controllers?
Well, they cannot, I think we have to clarify there as well. So they cannot, one actor cannot in any way create such an event. So that's part of the DBFT algorithm. So if you would like to attack the network in a similar fashion, then you would need to have more than 2/3 of the consensus nodes more or less going together and decide we are going to do this.
Right.
Which is, you don't only need 2/3 of the tokens, but you also need to make sure that you have enough nominees to be voted in, and you have to vote in such manner that more than 2/3 of the consensus nodes actually are being assigned to your parties, which require you in practice to have something around, I would say, at least 70 to 80% of all the tokens. And if you are holding 70 to 80% of the tokens, then one could argue, well, you should actually have the power to be able to make code changes if you do sure. Control that amount of consensus nodes.
Right. Now, NEO prides itself on its finality. It's known for that. It's also very explicit in its white paper, all its publications, that it's unforkable by design because of its PBFT design. DBFT. So in that respect, Malcolm, I do want to talk to you about what is happening. Did it actually do a real fork because of the bug?
So technically, it's called a fork. It didn't create a branch. So you have two situations. So when you talk about fork, for example, in traditional proof of work and proof of stake algorithms, what you have is you have two blocks that are created in the same height, and then the miners or the nodes that are part of the consensus can choose to continue to build a blockchain on either of these blocks. So that's usually what you talk about proof of work and proof of forking in proof of work and proof of stake. And that cannot happen in DBFT. So when this bug occurred, the good thing about this happening is that we actually do get a confirmation that we cannot have these two branches. So technically it is a fork in the sense that there are two blocks created in the same heights, but it stops there. Not one of them are actually being continued. So there is no, so you actually still preserve the finality of the block. So the only thing that needs to be done when you are in that situation is that nothing has to be revoked. So no transaction has to be revoked. You don't have to run back the blockchain. The only thing that you do is before the fork, there is a full block, of course, and you start from there, and then it will continue to go on after the nodes have been restarted.
Right.
So it still preserves the finality of the blockchain, which is very important. So I wouldn't say I'm happy that this happened, but I'm still a little bit happy that it happened now, because we get sort of evidence that the DBFT is actually working.
Right, and obviously now you've seen a real situation happen and has arisen where the whole system's been tested, and it's proven from what you're saying that it's really just a dead end for anything to happen and eventuate beyond simply those two blocks, being
right,
synergistically operating at the same time. Now, let's talk about ontology for a moment, in the sense that I want to find out what the exact nature is in relationship between NEO and ontology, because obviously I've spoken to Jun Lee at length about this, and he has his own perspective. Are you in fact totally separate entities or not?
We are completely separate entities. And we are, and the teams are completely separate as well. So everybody working at NGD is working 100% on NGD, and everybody who's working on ontology is working 100% on ontology. And we do have collaboration in certain technical research, and we do have an MOU on what to research on, and some restrictions and limitations in terms of, well, not competing with each other, more or less. So this is there are several ways to address this from a strategy point of view. If you want to go back 1.5 year when the ontology project was started, so what we have now is actually an ecosystem where we want to create a smart economy, and basically we are going to become the #1 smart contract platform in the world. And there are some quite fierce competitors out there that we are going to take down, and mainly the Ethereum is the biggest one, and that's what we're aiming at. We're going to be a blockchain platform, a smart economy, and an ecosystem that is actually better than Ethereum. So you have different focuses also when you build this ecosystem. So NEO is focused, of course, on digital assets and digital identity, whereas ontology is focused on data exchange and ownership of data.
Sure, but just for time constraints, I want to talk to you more about this specific question though, Malcolm. Obviously that there's a great deal of information about the differences between ontology and NEO, and people can go and look into that. But I want to quote to you something that Da Hongfei himself has claimed. Now, he says that the key alignment is with regard to the smart contract system, and I mean system specifically. Now, what I don't understand, and I'd like you to possibly explain this, is that clearly ontology has its own system. As you've mentioned, they are separate. And obviously NEO has its own smart contract design. Also, ontology has a very unique multi-chain architecture beyond digital identity and digital assets, as we're discussing. So is it in fact true to say that it's not really fair to acknowledge the synergy being smart contracts, but more the virtual machine itself?
So first of all, I will go back to that question. I still would like to complete my answer on the last question. So the thing with having the target separate between NEO and ontology is that we can actually work together on two fronts to compete and to actually surpass Ethereum, whereas the option would be to have everything in one platform, in one shared team with shared resources. And in that scenario, it would be more difficult in terms of allocating resources and allocating target use cases. So that's why it's useful from my perspective to have two fronts where we can actually develop separately and together in terms of achieving this smart economy.
Right. Okay. So in that respect, let's talk about the smart contract system then.
Right. And smart contract system, I wouldn't say that that's the main difference between the two platforms, but I would say that the target use cases are the main difference between the two smart contracts platform. And that's also,
Malcolm, just to clarify, actually what the statement was saying was that it's the similarity, it's the one thing that aligns between ontology and NEO is in fact the smart contract system. So is that actually the case? That's what I'm trying to understand. Does NEO have a different system entirely to ontology, or are they in fact running on the same system?
They are running the same virtual machine, which means that smart contracts can be written for the NEO VM, and they can be written for NEO VM on ontology. And the NEO VM is the joint the joint technology that both platforms are using. And this is very important. This is very important because we will end up in a scenario where we do need a vast difference of different chains with different use cases and with different what's the English word? You will have a few difference in terms of finality in block time, in decentralization, in perhaps in a private chains that you still want to have a cross-chain interactions with other chains, perhaps even ontology to NEO or NEO to a NEO private chain. You have all these different scenarios where you would like to create a chain of chains. And the key component of the NEOX that we're developing is actually NEO VM. So for us to be able to have cross-chain between ontology and NEO, it is vital that both of them are using the NEO VM.
Right, and currently that NEOX is in the theoretical stage at the moment that I've read from the GitHub. What I want to ask you though, Malcolm, is what happens if ontology develops its own VM? And in fact, are they doing so right now? And then if that happens, how will that affect NEO's relationship with ontology?
To my knowledge, they are not developing a VM, but I'm not part of the planning team on the ontology either, because we're two separate entities.
Right.
So I wouldn't know if they were doing so or not.
I see.
And if they were doing so, it would, in my opinion, break the MOU that we actually do have together. And if they would do that part, then the reaction from my point of view, being part of NGD, is that they are overstepping. And if they are overstepping, then I would take action in terms of making NEO the better platform.
I see. Now let's talk about. Yeah. I really want to talk about that, since you broached that in that statement, because the community are quite concerned that since ontology came to the fore, that all the interest has shifted across to ontology. It's reflected even in the Western reaction, in the hype itself, and even in the, I guess, the investments that they've put forth in terms of utility. So what do you say to that? Are you concerned at all that people are currently perceiving, or perhaps misperceiving, that ontology has elevated NEO or moved away from NEO with respect to its own design and perceived value?
There are several factors in that questions that needs to be addressed. So first of all, there is a statement that it had even been put forward as a fact that there has been investments moving from NEO to ontology. And first of all, if you present that as a fact, you would need to provide some kind of evidence that this is actually the case. Now, I'm not saying that it's not the case. It's based on the feedback from the community. And for example, the market channeling in Discord. It's fair to assume that there has been money moving from NEO to ontology. But then the follow-up question to that is, what kind of money is it that has actually moved from NEO to ontology, and what kind of people and what is their motive from moving from NEO to ontology? So what you have with people buying the tokens is that you have people buying them for, well, speculative reasons, and you have people buying them for the utility that the platform or the tokens actually bring. And this is another topic completely, but there are so many projects out there which has a token, and if you look into the details, the utility of that token is basically zero. So
absolutely.
It's 100% speculation.
No question in that. I totally agree. 95% of the projects out there are fundamentally crap, and then there's ones.
Regardless of that, so when you see if there are money moving from NEO to ontology, which likely there are at least some amount that has been done that, from my perspective, I would see that as the speculative money moving from the ontology or from the NEO to ontology, and then you need to think about how much does this actually matter, because speculative money will move sooner or later. So you have a project with a lot of speculative money will have these very volatile. It will be very volatile, because when it starts to gain traction, then it will be hyped. And when it's hyped enough, it will be a complete drop. And what we want to have here, I want to clarify this, is that we are working for long term, and that has to be very clear to everybody, and everybody who is even considering to buy tokens in any ecosystem. They need to know if the project is operating for the short term or for the long term, and NEO is operating for the long term. And if a project which is operating for the long term and has a certain amount of speculative money, that's not really part of the value. So the ones that have speculative money, it will sooner or later move out of it. So from the long-term perspective, it doesn't matter. But if you are a short-term investor, then it matters.
Sure, but Malcolm, I want to move away from price for a moment and talk about the team between ontology and NEO, because my understanding is that in China itself, there were reports, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there apparently were reports made that there were members of the NEO team who migrated across to ontology. Now, I've read the response in AMA, but I want to discuss it with you because those reports were real. Is it in fact true that any members at all have moved from NEO to ontology, and is there in any way an exodus happening?
I can answer from the point that I joined NEO. So I joined NEO in August. So I don't know what happened before August. Ontology was not even known to me in August. Ontology was known to me in, I think, September, October. Regardless, from August up until today, there has not been one single person moving from NGG or from NEO over to Ontology, not one single person. The only person that has moved is one person that has moved from on-chain to NGG, and that's Johnson, which is our general manager.
I see.
And that's the only transfer that has happened since I joined the team in August.
I thank you for that, because that's quite clear. But are you aware of that, any publications or any release of information in the media that said otherwise? Because I'll quote to you a statement from Erik Zhang himself. He says that the reason why there's not so many developers in the NEO office is because they're decentralized, they're international, nationally positioned. Is that the reason perhaps behind it? And are you aware again of any kind of media release that said something of the nature we're discussing?
So I can answer that question, but it will take a few minutes. So we had this discussion frequently since I joined the team as well. So for example, when I joined the team, there were about 5-6 people in the R&D team, which is not many people. And my first impression when I joined the team was like, well, let's start recruiting. We need more developers. And at that point in time, the vision for the NEO blockchain was to be an open source project, as open source as it can be, comparing it to, for example, Linux. So it should be a community initiative, and anyone who wants to work on it, even in China, should do so from the open source perspective. They should do it as open source contributors. So there has been different opinions from the very start on shall we grow the NGG team or not? And it has been directly related to how important is the open source mindset to the NEO. And there are people here that are very, very fond of the open source mindset, and it should be completely decentralized, and contributions should be completely open source contributors. Right. And we've gotten, and but we have seen now, for example, that the Java version, for example, writing smart contracts in Java, that one has not been picked up by the open source community. That's one example. And there has been other examples as well, though, where things we want to develop is not being picked up by the open source community. So from around, I would say, about the same time where we started to reorganize it, so around March, April, our stance on that have changed. So now we have decided that we do need to have a large development team here in NGD as well. And part of the reason, well, I can't say for 100% that it is part of the reason, but I would assume that part of the reason that we can have that is also because we have NEO Global Capital to back us up. So we have the profits from NEO Global Capital, which actually does provide a sustainable model to grow the NGG team to a quite large team without having to use the NEO tokens for that. So one of the issues with having, or at least previously, if we say before February, March, part of the issue of growing the NGG team too large is that it would be funded by NEO tokens. So then the NEO tokens would be more or less be distributed amongst NGG members. And then, sure. Then how decentralized would that be?
Sure, but Malcolm, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the real question I wanted to ask you though is just with regard to the decentralization of the team. So if someone walked into the office, would they see empty seats? Would they see empty desks? And is there a reason for that you can explain in terms of how many people are actually part of this decentralized network that you speak of in the ideal of developing a decentralized community?
The NGD team is around 40 people right now, and the office was completely full. It was over full up until Thursday last week, because we shared office. NGC was taking part of our seats. Mm-hmm. So the complete office was completely full. So now we have rented another space next door as well, which is really large.
I see. So essentially, respectfully, any suggestion that your team is diminishing is completely untrue. Is that fair to say?
It's complete opposite of what's actually happening. We are recruiting so fast that we have changed office 3 times, and we're preparing to extend the office now for the 4th time. So that's completely untrue. And we had to throw out NGC to another office temporarily because we had no more seats for the people that we are employing. That's completely untrue.
Well, thank you very much for explaining that. Now, I want to talk to you about the game plan that NEO has set forth for 2020. Now, on stage, Das said that he wants to be the #1 blockchain at that time of 2020 and have 100,000 TPS at a minimum, non-sharded on-chain. That's a big statement. Things have changed since then. Can you talk us through whether you're on track to achieve that?
We are on track to achieve that, yes. And there are several parts of that plan. So one part is, of course, the NEO 3.0, where we are addressing the scaling restrictions that we currently have in a manner that would allow us to reach 100,000 transactions per second. And this is an effort that is jointly here on our side from mainly Erik, who is analyzing from his perspective, and also NEO Research, which are 2 incredibly brilliant postdocs in Brazil, also funded by NEO. Oh, sorry.
Are you talking about Fabio?
No, Igor and Vitor Coelho. They are based in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Yeah.
Are they connected at all to the COZ?
They are like an independent. They are similar to COZ, a little bit smaller, but they are similar to COZ. So they are independently funded from NEO Foundation, and they are doing an amazing job. I think you should go to their GitHub and have a look. And they are also active in Discord. There is a channel. I'm not sure if it should be public in Discord. Let me have a look. There should be a NEO Research channel even in Discord where you can reach out to them. Yeah, it is.
Right.
So it may be misinterpreted by calling NEO Research. You think it's just research related to NEO, but it is actually the NEO Research community group that is discussing in that channel.
I see.
So they are part of it, and City of Zion are also part of developing this ambitious goal of reaching 100,000 transactions per second.
Right. So to clarify, is this part of the NEO 3.0 that we are hearing about now? And in that context, is it fair to say, given all of Erik's feedback, that really the fundamental premise for this new wave is enterprise? Is NEO 3.0 meant to be enterprise-centric?
It's meant to be both public and private. So it's meant for both use cases. And the current implementation of NEO, the NEO 2.x, is also meant for both private and public. And that maybe that has not been communicated enough. But that's also one of the big reasons why we are developing NEOX, which, by the way, you mentioned earlier that it's on design phase. It's already started. So we are already developing on NEOX, and we are aiming to have a prototype of NEOX ready by the end of this year. So
right.
It's still a long development.
Right, and let's talk about this a little bit more, because you mentioned that already there's an enterprise focus as well as the public blockchain that is known as NEO for its digital assets particularly. I want to talk about DNA as the protocol as well, because it was always split right from the beginning. It was always had enterprise flavor to the overall architecture that became on-chain at the time in NEO. So is the next iteration really just extending upon that to build out the enterprise potential of this ecosystem?
It's to build out the enterprise of the NEO blockchain. So whenever I still like to divide when you talk about DNA or ontology and the NEO blockchain, I still would like to divide them by the intentions of them. So ontology is once again for data exchange, and NEO is for asset exchange. You can see it roughly like that if you don't want to go too
right,
too
but
much.
respectfully, in the beginnings, there was no ontology. It was on-chain and NEO. So where does on-chain fit in the conversation when we talk about DNA and the DBFT? Because they're very similar from a code perspective. And then one was designed for enterprise, so they could build out into ecosystems on their own right using the DNA. And then we had the public blockchain using DBFT. So where
DNA was developed to be able to make customized changes or easily customized changes for specific use cases, which is not that easy to do, especially not in the current version of the NEO blockchain. So it was developed with that in mind. And even though they had that in mind, they did realize that they had to do a lot of work anyway, a lot of custom. So the idea with DNA was to reduce the development time that you have to spend over and over for each individual use case, to save time more or less, to make it more easily adaptable. But even with the DNA, they realized that, well, even though we have a customizable solution, we still do need to spend too much time on it. So it was sort of
makes sense. Now, if we could talk
not customizable enough.
Right, now let's talk about the NEO 3.0 more, Malcolm, because that is the new flavor, that is the new wave that's happening right now for the whole ecosystem that you represent. What is exactly happening? Are you going to be creating a similar structure like the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance? Are you moving in the direction of really recruiting a lot of different business interests in that sector? What is happening, and what can we expect from the NEO 3.0?
We already do have a lot of enterprise interest, and we do already have quite some enterprise projects going on. And NEO 3.0 it will help. So it will help in that matter as well. What I think will help even more is the project that City of Zion is developing, which is it's known as NEO Sharp, which is maybe not the best descriptive name of what they are developing. So it's a new Sharp implementation of NEO, but it is much more modular and much more easily testable and much more easier for new developers to learn the code and also to make changes and run complete tests with full code coverage tests, so that when you make custom changes to it, then you can actually run through the tests and see that nothing actually breaks. So I would say that part is in short term more important in terms of enterprise adoption.
And Malcolm, when will we receive updates of that, of the NEO Sharp and also of NEO FS in the file storage system? I've noticed that some of the updates are late. So is there any reason why that is the case, and when we can expect information? When can we expect information in terms of updates of these progressions?
Well, I can update you right now on the progress. So NEO Sharp is run by City of Zion mainly, and they were here in July to share for knowledge transfer. So NEO Sharp is something that our team here is also very interested in, and NEO Sharp is potentially something that could replace the 2.x. So the NEO Sharp becomes the new 2.x. That's very. It's very likely that will happen, because that will be easier for new developers to learn about how to code on NEO and how the blockchain works. So that's one part of it. And the progress, I'm not 100%. It's managed by City of Zion, of course. So the deadline of that has to come from them. The last thing I heard is that there's maybe 2-3 months left development before they can start full complete testing and running it as an independent chain. And once we got to that point, then it's time to see if, it's time to evaluate at least whether or not we want to switch the current 2.x to the NEO Sharp project instead.
I see.
And the other update you would like to have was the NEO FS, right?
Yes.
So NEO FS has been in design phase up until early summer. And then we have got in contact with a research group in Russia. And the current approach is to invest in this research group and let them have developed NEO FS for NEO as a way of extending the development capabilities without, faster. You can see it as faster, because we could do it in-house, but then you have the onboarding process that will be delayed. And still, if you have the onboarding process, the type of knowledge that you would be able to bring up is also quite limited.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a group of researchers in Russia which are high academic researchers, and the current approach is to invest in them to develop NeoFS as an independent development branch to be used for Neo blockchain.
Right, and I really appreciate that clear response, and hopefully we can see more of that information flow through in a more systematized way, or systematic way, perhaps on Medium, but certainly the community would appreciate that, Malcolm. Let's move now to a point of contention with regard to tokens themselves. Now, recently it's been published that there are a number of tokens that have been accessed and spent. Now, essentially, there were 15 million NEO tokens that were identified as transferred to an account. Of those, it's been stated and confirmed by both Erik and Dar that approximately 4 to 5 million of those were spent. So what I want to ask you is, what did you spend all of those tokens on when they were, my understanding is they were supposed to be held, for the ecosystem itself and not to be spent?
It has been spent as investment in ecosystem projects. And what every single transaction is invested in, that's information that we are summarizing right now. So Christian is collecting all the transactions and all the information on who it is invested to and for what reason it is invested to that entity.
Right.
So that's
Malcolm,
information.
it sounds like it's been reactive. Is it fair to say that because of the community's investigations, they found this anomaly, they've reported it to NEO? Is NEO simply reacting to this information of the 5 million, or was it always their intention to disclose and have a transparent expenditure statement?
The issue was brought up internally, I would say, around 1 or 2 months before the community started to react upon it. So it's not a reaction to the community, but it is reaction to the internal requests to make that information public.
So why is it taking so long, Malcolm, to get the information to the public if this has been happening for months?
It's, I would say prioritization. We are still a limited team here, and we are expanding, and we got for example, we got Lemony on board, which is an amazing person. She's really professional HR manager. She's been doing a great job for us already now. She's been here for not even 1 month, and she's still helping us. She sped up the recruitment quite fast. And so I would say that it's taken this time because of the limited resources that we do have. So putting this information as public information has been on you can see it on our to-do list since it was brought up internally. Right. But it wasn't prioritized until the community made such a big deal out of it, and then it got prioritized higher, of course.
Well, it's great to hear that you are listening to the community, and I appreciate that. But Malcolm, when can we expect to see some evidence of this list?
Within 1 or 2 months. What do I mean 1 or 2 months? I don't dare to put a deadline on that person on how long time it actually takes to collect all the information, but I would expect it within 1 or 2 months.
Sure, but respectfully, to quote Erik Zhang's term, he says that NEO is a community, not a company, and in that respect, surely it's important to put this information out if the community itself is asking for that. So hopefully that can be expedited as much as possible. Now, can we talk about dApps with regard to congestion issues? This is really important. Lots of feedback has come forth from the CEOs of these dApps. I want to talk to you about perhaps the concerns you've heard also with regard to the congestion issues, the bottlenecks that they face on a daily basis with regard to their choice to use NEO as their choice of platform.
Yeah, there are 2 things there. So we did a change to prevent spam attacks 3 weeks ago, I believe 3 or 4 weeks ago, which means that in every block there are 21 transactions that at most can be without a transaction fee. And if there are more transactions than that, then they will only be accepted if they have a transaction fee attached to them. And that's to prevent spam. and to prevent the blockchain to blow up without spending any resources. And so what the dApps have been experienced is that they are not attaching transaction fee to their transactions. And then, of course, as always, we experienced attacks, spam attacks, just briefly after we made this change, which meant that if projects are not attaching a transaction fee to their transactions, they will be queued because they are not part of these 21 free transactions. So what the projects have to do is to attach transaction fee to their transactions and invocations, and then there won't be any issue. So it's in gas token, they have to attach a gas token. And we have gotten reports that in a few cases, this is empirical reports, and it's subjective, so we have to look into this further. But there has been reports that certain invocations with transaction fee are not prioritized. So that we are running testing on that right now as well to see, is this actually the case? And if this is the case, we have to fix it, of course.
I see. Well, let's.
So from that perspective, they have to add transaction fee. That's how they will make sure that that the transaction will always go through. It's a priority from their perspective. If they really want to have it completely free, then they would have to accept that during attacks or large volume transactions, their transaction will be queued. And if they don't want to be queued, they do need to attach a transaction fee.
Sure, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, if we could talk about some of the key updates for up-and-coming plans that are currently, my understanding is, situated in the GitHub, in the repo. They are not as prioritized as other events. You have the NEP 8, 9, and 10. You also have the NEOX, as we discussed previously. Is it correct in saying that these are not priority projects right now, or are they going to be put on the top of the priority list for the future?
They are priority projects, and there are mainly community consensus that is needed before it can be developed. And these are not so. And NEP all the proposals in that GitHub repository is not meant to be developed by NGD. The only thing that they need to have is consensus. So there needs to be some sort of agreement in the GitHub that we are going to implement this, and we are going to implement this in that way. And once that is reached, then basically anyone can develop it. And usually, I shouldn't say always, but usually it's the one who proposed the change that would implement it, because that person naturally have some sort of interest in having it implemented.
Right.
And
so the question is, do these have precedence right now, though? Do they have priority?
That's up for the community. So they do have priority in terms of getting consensus, but they do not have NGD top priority in terms of developing it here.
I see.
So if there is community members who really do want it, then they have to push it to get priority. And once it's consensus reached, then the community has to develop it.
Right. Now, if we can talk about sharding for a moment as well, Malcolm. Obviously, Hongfei mentioned he wants it non-sharding 100,000 TPS by 2020. But then there's references recently to dynamic sharding. And can you tell us more about what the plan is with regard to sharding? Are you going to be sharding or not?
We are going to be sharding. It's not so the one with 100,000 transactions per second is a goal that we want to be able to have on the main chain without scaling technologies. But we will have sharding on top of that as well, because 100,000 transactions per second is still not enough. So there will be sharding as well. And what Kanesin was here actually last week, and we discussed this issue, and we discussed the NEO 3.0 as well as if and when we decide to actually move over to 3.0, what do we do with NEO 2.x? And it's a proposal that we discussed that we may actually put the NEO 2.x as a shard on NEO 3.0, which would, in my opinion, be the most optimal solution in terms of maintaining the data that platforms have already developed. And making sure that they can choose to still operate on NEO 2.x if that fulfills all the requirements that they have.
Sure, and I ask you this because Fabio Kennison is an advisor for Elrond, and Elrond is focused on dynamic sharding, and clearly you're also focusing on that in the future. So there must be, I imagine, a synergy there, or certainly an interest for the future. Is that fair to say?
Well, this is the first time I heard about Elrond, so from my perspective, yes, it would be interesting to talk to them and see if there are any synergies there.
And that was certainly not my intention to plug it. I was just assuming, given that Fabio is an advisor there. Now, if we could talk a little bit more about commercial applications with regard to NEO 3.0 or 3.0, can you tell us some names of some of these commercial interests right now, so we can have an understanding of the gearing, where we're headed?
I would not like to give names because it's not in my position to do so. So if the company themselves wants to be public with which blockchain they are using, then they should make that announcement. Mm-hmm. This is also to respect the companies and their competitive advantage.
Well, so have you asked them by any chance? Have you asked them if they want to be public so the community can understand more of some of these commercial and enterprise-related partners?
Yes, we have asked, and up until now, only KPN and Fellowship Capital are the ones that have agreed to be public support.
I see.
Maybe not support is the right word, but publicly using the NEO blockchain, and also doing research and applying the NEO blockchain in some of their use cases.
Okay.
I would like to put it that way.
I appreciate that. Now, a question from Reddit from Walter has asked about security issues with regard to malicious attacks. What's being done, given the numerous occasions of problems that NEO has encountered on the blockchain, to circumvent and address malicious attacks?
So, one of the changes was the one that was implemented just right before we experienced these complaints from dApps that their transactions were not going through. So implementing this limited amount of free transaction and requiring a transaction fee on top of that if it surpasses the free transaction. That's one of the ways to prevent malicious attacks in terms of bloating the blockchain without having any penalty on that. So that's one of it. And there are a few other improvements on patches that has not reached full consensus yet on the correct implementations that are in the pipeline as well. And we had, for example, last Friday we had CWho360 who reported a bug to us in the afternoon, and that was. But from we received, they actually did a very, very good report and sent it over to us very timely. Mm-hmm. So from the point we received the report on the vulnerability, it took us 63 minutes to confirm that there was this vulnerability and to develop the patch and to deploy the patch across the network. So that was also answered in a very timely manner.
Right, that clearly shows the value of the community itself, because they're bringing they're finding those bugs and addressing them directly to you.
Right, and that's also part perhaps about Red4Sec, and that's also part of how Red4Sec and NEO got in order to start with, and this was very early. So this was in I believe it was October last year, where they also found an issue or a vulnerability in NEO. They reached out to us and they proposed a solution to the vulnerability, and that's also how the relationship between Red4Sec and NEO started to develop. Right. And we are discussing with 3 different parties, large parties, on having complete. We have had security audit from Red4Sec, but we also are in discussion with 3 large parties on having a complete security audit again on the NEO blockchain. And at least I am personally leaning towards having that for the NEO Shark, since NEO Shark is most likely to be the version that we will be running on the mainnet in the near term.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now I want to talk to you a little bit more about some of the exodus we're seeing of dApps as well. because many of them are now choosing to do their own chains. And surely that must be a concern right now, given that you want to support as many of the DApps as possible to really become a mainstay stakeholder in the platform race. Are you concerned that some of these current dApps are moving away?
I don't see it as they are moving away. I think it's actually a very valid choice from their perspective. So you have to evaluate from their use case. If they have a use case where they need to, well, they can have, for example, that they need to control the consensus nodes because what they're actually building is a sort of consortium chain. Then it's very important for them to control the consensus nodes. So then they should run their own chain because of their use case. Sure. Another reason is that they expect themselves to have such a large number of transactions that not even NEO will be able to handle the amount of transactions that they would like their own platform to have. So for that reason, they want to have their own chain.
Right, but
it can be other reasons as well.
Respectfully, isn't one of the key value points for NEO the fact that it can house so many DApps and it needs to build out more of them?
It's both. So it will be impossible to have all DApps in the world on one single blockchain. It will be a combination of chains and sharding, of course. So for some projects to choose to have their own chain, it's a valid choice, and it is a correct choice for some of the projects. I wouldn't say all of the projects, but for some of the projects. And there may be other reasons as well of creating their own chains, which is more economical, but that would have to be answered for the specific project itself, if that's the case or not. Mm-hmm. And it's actually advantageous, because when they are building their own chain, at least the majority of the own chains that I have seen going for that option still chooses to do that on a NEO version, which is actually running the NEO virtual machine. Which means, of course, that with NEOX, they will still interact with the main chain. So it's actually the way that we do want to develop, so that we can reach, so we can actually achieve a smart economy, because the smart economy will be a chain of chains. It will not be one single chain that controls them all, so to speak. It will be a chain of chains, and the platform who can build the longest or the most useful chain of chains, that's the most valuable blockchain platform, in my opinion.
Now, speaking of chain of chains, what a perfect segue in the discussion of Elastus. Now, I want to talk to you about that, because initially the real value point that Elastus had always promoted with regard to NEO was that it was designed in such a way when the smart contract traffic was supposed to be supported by NEO. Since then, ERC20 are now supported by Elastus. So what's your understanding, what's your position with regard to your relationship as an entity, as NEO, with Elastus?
I'm not that familiar with the Elastos platform to make any statement about that. The only thing I can say that NGD as an entity does not have any partnerships with individual projects as of now.
Mm-hmm. So zero partnerships with any other platforms.
Right. Ontology, we do have an MOU with Ontology, and that's how far it goes. And that may change. That may change, because now we are doing some more reorganizations here in NGD as well. So we will, for example, restructure the business development team, because they're not really doing business development, they're doing ecosystem growth. So the business development team will change name into ecosystem growth, and we will do some changes here. I would like myself also move over to that team to make it more clear on what the focus of the NEO is. And with the ecosystem growth team, it is more likely that we will establish more closer collaborations with both external parties and potentially other token projects as well.
Right. Well, that's obviously NEOX is coming, and that will be even more of an incentive to develop this further and network with other platforms. Now, I want to talk to you about marketing. That's a big issue. It's come up many times. Currently, there is people claiming that you have minimal outreach. You've heard these things before on the AMA. Scarce tweets, cryptic poetry has been some of those statements. But essentially, the consensus of the community has been a lack thereof of really productive marketing strategies. What's going to change and how will it change?
Yeah, first of all, I agree. I agree completely with all the criticism. So I want to have that clear also to start with. And it is a weak area in NEO. It is. And we are employing now, and we are putting. I think it's good that we got this kind of feedback from the community, because there has been different opinions within the team as well on in which way marketing should be arranged. And to get the community feedback on that as well, it's valuable, because then it sort of gives more input in which direction that is actually the correct direction. And the consensus is that the marketing will change radically. So it will, as I mentioned, those roles will be employed. We will employ more marketing people, and well, there is those who know about the NEO's history. They will know about, well, focus on technology, not about marketing and so forth. And it was the correct approach up until, let's say, January, February, where we did experience some peer-to-peer issues. So it was not the correct time to onboard too many projects, and those have been resolved since February. So based from February on, it would be a better solution from my personal perspective. So this is not NGD perspective. From my personal perspective, I would like to see our marketing to be more aggressive since February, March. Right. And everybody did not agree on that standpoint, and that has made it be postponed up until, well, basically around this point of time when, and I think it's good also, and it's partly I think partly all of this criticism is based on the market is really bad. People are frustrated. It's.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Malcolm, but I've read the feedback, and it's actually, from my position as someone who's analysing those comments, it's quite more than that, in the sense that what they're saying is that their experience has been that they see a lot of meetups happening around the world, a lot of tweets about those locations, but not a lot of real explanations about core tech. A lot of that's really public, a real dearth of speakers in the NEO ecosystem delivering educational information that they essentially need. So that's a fair point, I think, that the community are making that. Do you agree with that?
I agree. And the team is reorganizing here now. The marketing team is also reorganizing. So it's, I agree with the criticism, and we are taking action on it.
Right. Can you talk us through, though, what the strategy is? Because we want to make sure there is something clear in the pipeline. What is the plan?
I would really like to. I don't think it is in my position to do so.
I see. So you are aware, though, there is a clear plan.
There is, yes.
Okay. Now, if we could talk a little bit more about Telegram, all the different streams of media that you do have, your different platforms. I want to talk specifically about how they're managed and who manages them, because my understanding is that many of the participants who are admins even are community members who don't necessarily have the expertise perhaps required to answer fundamental questions that the community needs. Are you going to change that if that is true?
Let's see here. Yes, and I don't completely agree with the statement that first of all, they don't have the expertise enough, because there are very knowledgeable people that on their own time is taking the time to answer questions, both easy questions regarding NEO on a more general level, but also very technical questions. And they should have all the credit. So I don't completely agree with it. Okay. And you have these different channels as well, and Reddit is very well moderated, in my own opinion. We have moderators for that, which are doing an excellent job. Discord is also moderated, not as strictly as Reddit, because Discord is sort of the place where we do want to have all type of different feedback, and where there should be at least a channel to discuss everything. We even have a channel for random to discuss anything that's not even closely related to blockchain. So it's like an open community for everyone. And that one is also being moderated, but not as strictly, of course. We have Facebook, which is used to answer questions, but we are not yet using actively in the proper manner. We have Twitter, which is also not used in a proper manner in terms of marketing. So there are these different community channels which we do need to improve. I agree with that part of the questions.
Right, and I appreciate your response, and you clearly defended the quality of of expertise of different members within those different platforms. So thank you for explaining that. Now, I want to talk to you about security tokens of the future. Clearly, we're moving in that direction in many respects. There's going to be, I would imagine, a tsunami of security tokens at some point. Is NEO prepared for that, or are they preparing for that kind of thing?
We are preparing for that. I can say that much. I don't want to say too much about it because this is also very closely related to strategy, and I don't want to give away too much to potential competitors. But we are preparing for it, yes. Okay,
well that sounds very interesting. I'd like to have a conversation about that sometime in the future. Now, with regard to COZ and NEL as well, I want to talk about funds with regard to how much essentially NEO is doing to really build out and utilize the ecosystem. Now, I'll read you a quote from 2Alpha on Reddit. He says, COZ and NEL have less than 1% of the funds that NEO does, and yet they, in his opinion, are doing more than NEO is for themselves. So what do you take from that statement?
I would first like to confirm that the 1% is actually a correct number or not. Mm-hmm. So we can keep that part out of this question, but if he's making a statement that they have less than 1%.
Well, let's just remove the equation of the percentage and let's just say less, significantly less.
Well, they are, it's a fair opinion, and if you look at it as community altogether compared to NEO Global Development, then yes, the community is around four times larger than what NGD is. Mm-hmm. So it's quite reasonable that they are doing more development. And as we touched based on earlier as well, that part of the strategy or part of the desire from the NEO Council last year was that we actually do want to build the ecosystem in that manner, that we want to have independent community groups. Right. And it is changing now. And by the way, there are also more aspects to that. So we have a very good business development team here, which, by the way, I imagine will change name to Ecosystem Growth. Mm-hmm. And they're doing an excellent job, and it's not shown. And that's a little bit of it's a double-edged sword. It's a bit of a pity that the community doesn't get that information. On the other hand, they're doing a lot of work directly with parties, as I mentioned earlier as well, that doesn't want to announce that they are building blockchain solutions at this point in time.
I see. It's quite
can't be.
Sure, it's quite the crypto conundrum in that sense, because someone loses regardless of which way you turn. Now, let's talk about the government for a moment. I know NEO do not like to talk about this, but we do need to go here. And that's because Consensus have been in town. They've been in China, and they certainly are working towards the prospect of greater alignment with government entities. Obviously, they're pro-Ethereum, and that's why I want to discuss this, because many people have traditionally regarded NEO as the Chinese Ethereum. It's not something that NEO as a title, but clearly Ethereum is in China also. Are you concerned at all by that?
So first of all, there was an article that wrote about this, and that was a very poorly written article from a journalist perspective, and I would like to criticize that a lot. And I have reached out to them and criticized directly that it is very poor for journalists to put it like they did, because if you read the article, you will see that it was actually a bidding on the contract, and there was no NEO NGD, for example, did not bid for that contract. Mm-hmm. So to state in the article in the headline that Chinese government choose Ethereum over NEO, it's completely false, because there was no decision between NEO and Ethereum, because NEO was not part of that discussion.
Right.
So it's a very poor article that got too much attention, and I do criticize the journalist for writing it that way, and I criticize the editor to publish it that way without doing proper research.
Sure, Malcolm, I appreciate that you regard it as very subjective, but what I did want to ask you though is it a concern, more the issue of Ethereum having a presence in China?
So what they are developing, which is also very important to realize, is they are developing private solution using their POA version of Ethereum, and that's more or less the same thing as if they would develop using Hyperledger or whatever. And the reason why they chose Ethereum, that has to stand for them. I have my speculations on why, but we have to be clear on that it is the POA version, so it's not the public chain.
Sure.
So,
but I really want to just try and elicit a response from you with regard to whether or not you, as a senior developer and research leader, are concerned that Ethereum is somewhat accepted in the Chinese space, given that for such a long time NEO has had such a strong position, such a pole position in China, particularly with regard to its potential as a public blockchain.
So that's the point I want to get to. It's not Ethereum who has been accepted, it's Consensus that has been accepted, Consensus as an entity. So that's a very clear difference. Ethereum, if we discuss it as a public blockchain, has not been accepted.
Okay, so are you willing to make that statement very public? Is it fair to say that Ethereum is not, at this point in time, accepted in China in comparison to NEO?
I cannot make that statement because I'm not part of the government.
Okay. So if you can't make that statement, that is it fair to say that you don't know?
The question itself is whether or not Ethereum is accepted in China or not.
Exactly.
I mean, all the blockchains are accepted in China. So there's really nothing to...
So what I'm asking you is, to your knowledge, are there any indicators that suggest that moving away from consensus for a moment, because obviously there is an inherent implication there for Ethereum, are there any indicators to your knowledge that Ethereum is accepted at a government standpoint or even in enterprise itself in comparison to NEO?
Again, we have the difference there between... well, I can answer the question directly. I have not seen any indications whether or not one blockchain is preferred over the other. I have not seen any indication of that whatsoever, and there will not be either, because China is a very capitalistic country, regardless of what some people may think. So whichever is the best capitalistic solution will be selected by whoever is choosing it. So for a Consensus to win that contract, most likely they were the best proposal in terms from that perspective. And I think it is of course a valid point. And I see that mainly from my perspective as a senior R&D manager. I find it problematic that we in NGD not yet have the capacity to serve enterprise use cases as the way that Consensus does, and that's something that I would like to fix. So that's what's important from my perspective in that event. So what I would like to do as a senior R&D manager is that I would like to have a version of NEO that is stripped of the functionalities that are necessary for, let's say, a private chain. You have the NEO token, you have the gas token, you have the consensus nodes, where consensus nodes would, in a private chain, you would like to set the nodes. You could run the DBFT algorithm, but you would like to predefine who the nodes are to be able to suit it for an enterprise use case. Right. So that's on the other hand what I, as a senior R&D manager, would like to do, to make a version of the NEO which is easier to fulfill these use cases. And I would like to do it with the NEO Sharp project. And I even discussed it, I think it was 2 weeks ago, with Johnson of perhaps even making a bounty on creating a strict version of the NEO, which is more easily used for simple use cases, because we don't have that at the moment. And once we have that, then it's also easier for us to build up the capability to help with development as well, which is something Consensus can do now, and we don't have that capacity in NGG yet to do that.
Right. So essentially, we're talking about NEO 3.0. I mean, that's many of these things relate to.
Not at all. No, that can be just done just as well in 2.x, and it's not much that needs to be done as well. So it may even be a short-term bounty. So
I'm talking about all these
not
different
at all.
changes you're mentioning, though. You're referencing it's making some changes to have more of a private, cluster of nodes for enterprise solutions. Are you talking about this can all happen pre 3.0?
Yes, yes. There's nothing at all to prevent from that. Nothing at
Okay.
all.
So given
It
that,
can be
surely it can
very short
happen.
term.
When can it happen then?
To have that ready, I think it can happen within 2 months, 3 months. I think it's a reasonable amount of time to have an enterprise version of the NEO blockchain ready. And once that is ready, we need to build up the capacity to use it. And then that's another decision that has to be made. Do we want to build that capacity within NGD, or do we want to build that capacity in some other manner? I'm, for example, going to India in end of October to meet with outsourcing firms, software outsourcing companies in India to discuss, because they have shown interest and they have reached out and say, hey, we want to do new developments, and we need knowledge transfer, and then this enterprise solution is something that they may be interested in. So that's also something that I would like to bring up.
And Malcolm, and given that you've mentioned that China essentially is a capitalistic country, like many of the different countries around the world, it's interesting that you allude to the fact that possibly it's not about whether it be Ethereum or even NEO or any other platform. It's about being the best platform for its use case. Now, given that, are you concerned at all that Ethereum is in town, given that there are no national borders really for any of these platforms, and that you're really competing against a giant?
I think it's good. Competition is good. I mean, if that article was not published, then that wouldn't push us in NGD to actually focus more and press more on our own enterprise capabilities. So competition is good. And so I'm not concerned in that matter. I think it's good. It's good to have someone to compete against. And I'm looking forward to compete against them as well.
Right.
I'm quite excited about that.
Right.
And
so your sleeves are rolled up.
Chinese market is quite specific, and I think it's interesting that they do come to China, and I'm looking forward to have some good competition with them.
Right. Well, you clearly have a competitive streak. Just the tone of your voice, your sleeves are rolled up, and you're ready to fight. Now, let's talk about these consensus nodes, Malcolm, because obviously community is the focus, not business, not essentially a company. But there's a lot of criticism right now that you don't have a wholly decentralized system. Once again, harping back to the few nodes that you do have, can you tell us how you are planning to become more decentralized?
Yes, I will. So there's two aspects to it. One aspect is decentralization in terms of nodes, and the other one is decentralization in terms of ownership of tokens. Decentralization in terms of node also have two parts. One part is who owns the node, and the second part is, are they actually decentralized? So are they actually in different geographic locations? And the second part there is already fulfilled. So all the consensus right now are in different geographic locations. They are not in the basement in Erik's basement, which sometimes suggested. So they are already decentralized in terms of geographic locations. And right now we have CDLScience running on the mainnet. We have KPN running on testnet. We have Fenbush Capital running on testnet. KPN, we aim to vote them in on mainnet within this quarter. So we have around 5-6 weeks left for that.
Right.
That's our goal. And Fenbush Capital should be voted in before the end of this year. They are a little bit behind. We have another party, which is an entity, I think they're even larger than KPN, which do want to host the consensus node, but is not voted in on testnet yet. So they don't have their node up and running yet. And then we have another entity even larger than that are also moving towards that direction. Oh, two actually.
I see. So how many can we expect to see? Because currently, can you give us a number? How many is it right now?
Right now, in terms of running a node or have interest in running a node, that we also think are good for the ecosystem.
Let's do both. Tell us right now how many are actually running the node and how many are on board to run the node. What are the two numbers you can give us?
There are two different entities running nodes on mainnet. there are 4 different entities running on testnet, and there are 3 entities that are preparing to move on to testnet, or where at least are mutual interest in proceeding towards it.
Right. So there's a long way to go before it's fully decentralized. What's the ambition long term for the number in which you could cope with?
So the number is directly impacted by the voting. So that's nothing that can be controlled directly by the NEO Foundation or NGD. So it's based on, I won't go into the exact algorithm, but it's based on how many consensus nodes that the average voter votes for. So it's decided by the voters themselves. And
okay, I understand that. So obviously you are making it clear that you're moving out into the decentralized domain more and more as time passes. But I want to also now talk about the divisibility debate, because NEO has staunchly defended its position as being indivisible as a token. But my understanding now is that debate is in-house, and there's a lot of discussion, a very robust one happening, about whether or not...
I will go back to that. I would like to clarify, though, in terms of decentralization, because I know that we have gotten a lot of criticism for decentralized too slow.
Yes, please do so, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And I would like to explain the option that you have. So the option that you have is to either decentralize, as we do, partly by voting in to start with, like a bootstrapping system. We vote in parties that we believe are in mutual interest for both the ecosystem and for that party to actually run a consensus node, so that we get responsible parties to uphold the integrity of the network. And these large enterprises are usually have good systems and good processes in place and are reputable companies, and they are betting their reputation on running a proper node and being an honest actor in the system. And that's the choice that NEO has done. And the option that you have compared to that is what EOS have done, more or less, to decentralize everything at once and doing it solely by token ownership.
Right,
so
and that's now entirely idealistic.
It is, and what you have now is 21 block producers in EOS. That is very, very, very unlikely to ever change because of how the system is built up. So all the new tokens that are being generated on the EOS network is going to the block producers, and they vote for themselves. And they have incentives to remain block producers. So they will go together and make sure that each other are block producers. So they will not vote each other out. So you have a system.
Sounds like very much the model we see of banks.
Right. So you have the decentralization in terms of 21 block producers now. But in the end, it's basically one entity. I wouldn't see that as the decentralization in terms of entity, because it's in their interest to keep each other part of that conglomerate. Right. So I would like to clarify that our approach is much better than doing it that way. And then we can go back to the indivisibility if you
yes,
like.
I would love to do that. Now, thank you for explaining that. Let's talk about the changes you're making to the indivisible nature of the NEO token, because it's been proudly so. It's been something that you couldn't chop up into pieces.
Right, and it shouldn't be, in my opinion. It shouldn't be divisible, in my opinion. And I have very strong opinions about that. And
let's talk about the debate, though, that's happening internally.
There isn't really a debate on it internally. It's a suggestion in GitHub to make it divisible. And so the thing is,
well,
there isn't really...
Erik Zhang has been speaking of it, though, acknowledging that there is currently discussions at the least happening.
Right, and he made a GitHub issue on the divisibility, and I have commented on that issue, and the community have commented on that issue, and whatever the consensus is in that issue, that's what will happen. So there isn't a debate. I think that's also kind of a misunderstanding on how we operate. I mentioned earlier also that we really do have the open source spirit as part of our company culture. And especially Erik as well, he's one of the big proponents of open source. So he's not pushing anything. So there's no debates about his opinion and other opinions within NGD, but his proposals, which are sometimes misinterpreted as we should do this. Because he's one of the founders. He's an authoritative figure. He's one of the founders. So his opinion carries a lot of weight, but it should not be interpreted as we should do this. When he posts anything on GitHub, that's like anyone else also posts a proposal on GitHub, it is to be discussed and a consensus will be reached.
Absolutely.
And
now, just speaking, referencing GitHub, obviously the City of Zion is heavily involved in that kind of area. I want to ask you, is the relationship with COZ still very strong? Are there any rifts perhaps we need to know about? Are there any intentions to change this relationship that has been always known as something that's been very collegial and very supportive, mutually so?
It's mutually very supportive. And what I think that's also visible for having them coming over here in July with I think it was eight or nine people from all over the world and different skill levels over here to Shanghai to share knowledge about what they're doing with NeoSharp and also have a look at what we are developing here in Shanghai.
Right.
And it's also a healthy discussions going on. So. For example, there are suggestions on things that have to be improved, well, on both sides, and those are things that we are very open to discuss with each other as well. So right. There are some things, for example, that City of Zion may not be too happy about in MGD, and then they will lift that forward, and then we will discuss that. So it's a very mature relationship, in my opinion.
I see. So there's a lot of professional discussion happening. Now, Malcolm, it's been an absolute privilege speaking with you. We have discussed many different parts of the community's concerns, many different aspects rather. I really do appreciate your time today. Is there anything you'd like to say to the community, given this is a community-focused discussion right now?
I'm very happy to have the community that we do have, and I'm also very happy to have critical feedback. So I appreciate both you for taking the time to collect all this feedback, and I also appreciate all the opinions that the community have put forward. So I feel a little bit humble that we do have this good community that we do have, and.
Well, just to acknowledge two of them, I also would like to give Tyler Swope a plug again, Chico Crypto, and also to Jeremy. Both of them have worked tirelessly to really elicit some of the concerns also from the community, and they continue to do so. So on behalf of the community, thank you to both of them. And once again, thank you for acknowledging the work that the community does. Yes,
and I do agree with much of the criticism. I do agree with the criticism of marketing. So that's also something that I would like to have seen improved at an earlier stage. And there has been communication issues as well. And I'm of course part of that as well. So I'm even though I'm not part of the marketing and community team, I'm working as senior R&D manager, but I do like to respond to community concerns.
Absolutely.
So I am sort of filling that role anyway.
Right. So as a wrap up, what are you thinking for the vision of NEO? Is it looking good?
It's I'm really excited. I really am really excited. So we have a lot of things happening right now. We the last few weeks have been healthy in terms of prioritizing the things that the community also are prioritizing. So I'm very confident the community will be happy with what we are producing in the coming few weeks, and even in the next monthly report, I'm certain that you will already then see the improvements that have been made.
Sure. Well, on behalf of all the community, honestly, it's a great privilege to be able to have this opportunity to speak with you, to speak with NEO directly in the core team. Until next time, Malcolm Lerider, we really do appreciate that you've come here, you've let the community know from a direct source what's going on, and we really do look forward to having more updates in the future about the NEO ecosystem.
Thank you, and feel free to reach out again anytime you have questions.
Sure. Well, thank you very much once again, Malcolm Lerider, for your time. You've heard it from him. He is inviting you to have a voice. He's welcoming you with open arms into the NEO core team to have your comments heard. Once again, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to talking to you very soon.
Thank you.